Okay, so going to look over 2A, understanding percentages, and 2B, percentages, decimals, fractions. I think the best place to start really is doing the conversions between percentages, decimals, and fractions. So we'll start with decimals to percentages. Decimals to percentages, because that's probably the easiest way, and we'll do percentages to decimals after that as well. So let's say we had a couple of percentages, a couple of decimals. It was, 0.48, for example. We need to turn that into a percentage. So what you want to be looking at is always, from decimal to percentage, we're going to multiply by 100. So when we multiply by 100, there are 2 zeros in 100. So we're actually going to pick the decimal place up, and we're going to move it 2 places. And we move it 2 places to the right because we're multiplying. So multiply, we move right, and 2 places because of the 2 zeros in 100. So we can actually just pick this up, move it 2 places, and it becomes 48%. Alright, another example, looking at that, let's say we had it as a larger decimal number. Alright, so let's say we had, maybe 2.56 was our decimal number. Exactly the same process. We're going to multiply by 100. So we're going to pick that decimal point up, move it 2 places to the right, and we end up with 256%. Okay, we do that because, again, multiply means we're moving right, and 2 zeros on 100 mean we're moving 2 places. Alright, so that one's pretty straightforward. Alternatively, if we're looking at having percentages going back to a decimal, alright, we actually do the exact opposite process of that. So I'm going to pick a couple of percentages. Let's say we have 78%. We basically just treat the 78% as its whole number, 78. There it is. And the decimal point for that would actually be at the end of the 8. So it could be actually 78.0. Now when we go from percentages to decimals, we're actually going to, this time, divide by 100. Okay, so when we divide, our decimal point this time is actually going to move left, and again 2 places because of the 2 zeros in 100. So we can actually just pick our decimal point up and move 2 places to our left, and our answer would then become 0 or 0.78. I do like to put a 0 at the start of it, just to sort of show that there is 0.78. Just gives a bit of place value. As another example, if we had, 142%. Alright, same deal. We treat it as, or the 142, we treat that as a whole number itself, 142. Remembering that there would be a decimal point with a 0 at the end of that. And we pick that decimal point up and we move it 2 places left, and it sits between the 1 and the 4, so our decimal would be 1.42. Okay, so I'm hoping that actually makes a bit of sense. The next thing we're going to look at is turning fractions into percentages. So this is what happens when your teachers basically start with a raw score. Let's say on a maths test or something like that. So we're going to have turning fractions into percentages. Alright, we've used this one a few times in class. Let's say there was a test. That test was out of 70 marks, and someone got 48% on that. Okay, so what we'd look at is rewriting this section out as 48 divided by 70. That will give us decimal number, and then we're going to multiply it out by 100 to put it into a percentage. Okay, so 48 divided by 70 gives us 0.685. Times it by 100, and like we did just that little bit earlier, because we're multiplying, we're going to move the decimal point 2 places to the right, 2 places because we have 100 there. So we can pick that decimal point up, move it 1, move it 2 places, and it ends up being 68.5%. Right. If we do round, right, it is going to round up to 69% there. Okay. Just because we do have fractions, 48 out of 70, for example, doesn't mean we can't have an improper fraction. All right, so just going to draw a line down this side. We can have a result that is larger itself than the result. So we can have, for example, 78 out of 70. Now, for a maths test, this isn't really the case, but it might be another real-life example. I'd have to think of one later on. So 78 over 70, we would have our top number, 78. We divide it by the bottom number, is our 70, and again, to turn it into a percentage, multiply by 100. So 78 divided by 70 gives us 1.114. We'll just leave it at 1. We times it by 100. Because we are multiplying, we're going to move right, and we're going to move 2 places right because of the 2 zeros. So 1, 2, drop the decimal point, ends up being 111%. Okay, so that should be pretty straightforward. This is really the basics. Later on we start looking at sort of increasing and decreasing amounts by percentages. That becomes a little bit more enjoyable. Okay, so there's that. The next section I want to look at is fractions as percentages by finding their equivalent fractions. Okay, so I'll just get a bit of a heading going on that. Fractions as percentages by first finding equivalent fractions. Okay, fractions as percentages by finding the equivalent fraction to start with. So sometimes we can find some really easy ones. Let's say we had 3 over 50. What we want to do is actually find the equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100 all the time, because it makes it really, really simple. So we have to ask ourselves, how do we get from 50 to 100? Now we can only multiply or divide. Now easily we multiply by 2. So what we do to the bottom, we then need to do also to the top. Alright, so we take our 3, we times it by 2, end up with 6. And then obviously 6 over 100 gives us 6%. Alright, I'll do 2 more examples. One more straightforward one. 1 over 4 equals something over 100. So how do we get from 4 to 100? We obviously need to then multiply by 25. Again, what we do to the bottom, we do to the top, and we end up with 1 times 25 is 25. So 25 over 100 gives us 25%. Okay, we can go the other way as well. So at the moment we've got a number that's less than 100. We've got a number less than 100. What happens if we actually have a number that is larger than 100? Alright, so we could have something like 70 out of 500, for example. Alright, nothing really changes. It just means instead of multiplying, we may have to divide. So how do we get from 500 to 100? We obviously divide it by 5. Same process. 70 divided by 5, and that will give us, last time I checked, 14. 14 out of 100 gives us our 14%. Okay, might leave it at that. I'll do another video in about 5 minutes or so. That will give you an opportunity to look at how we write mixed numbers as a percentage. So I think that was looking at, I think it was number 12. I think it was. We were having a little bit of an issue with that one earlier today. But certainly we can look at that in a sec.